Regulations regarding steering gears are set out by the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, in SOLAS. Many of the rules for steering gears set out in SOLAS are based on lessons learned from the grounding and loss of the tanker Amoco Cadiz in 1978. There are many different combinations of steering gear that will satisfy the requirements of SOLAS. There are also some special provisions in SOLAS for certain types of older ships. There are also an increasing number of non-standard arrangements, such as podded drives, coming into use on modern ships. In all cases, flag states and classification society rules ensure that every ship will comply with or have equivalence to the SOLAS requirements. The key point for ship staff is that they understand how to operate and test their own steering gear in order to comply with the requirements of SOLAS. To see what SOLAS has to say about the requirements for the steering gear on different ship types, click on each of the hotspots shown. Every ship must have a main steering gear and an auxiliary steering gear, but there is no need for an auxiliary steering gear if the main steering gear has 2 or more power units, and after a single failure in its piping system or in one of the power units, the defect can be isolated so that steering capability can be maintained or speedily regained. There is no time limit set for this in SOLAS. Each hydraulic reservoir must be fitted with a low-level alarm to warn of an oil leak. Audible and visual alarms must be given on the bridge and in the machinery space where they can be seen. Relief valves are provided to reduce the risk of hydraulic pipes bursting. A main steering gear is one which is capable of putting the rudder over from 35 degrees on one side to 35 degrees on the other side with the ship at its steepest seagoing draft and running ahead at maximum ahead service speed, and, under the same conditions, from 35 degrees on either side to 30 degrees on the other side in not more than 28 seconds. The reason that the time for rudder movement is only measured from 35 to 30 degrees is that in many steering gears, the rate of steering pump delivery is reduced as the rudder nears its desired position. The rudder will therefore slow down during the last 5 degrees of movement, so the time for this part is excluded from the time measurement, to give a better idea of how fast the rudder can move when the steering gear is working at its full capacity. An auxiliary steering gear is one which is capable of putting the rudder over from 15 degrees on one side to 15 degrees on the other side in not more than 60 seconds with the ship at its steepest seagoing draft and running ahead at 1/2 of the maximum ahead service speed, or 7 knots, whichever is the greater. If the ship has more than one rudder and is navigable with only one rudder, and each rudder has its own independent steering gear, then only one main steering gear needs to be fitted to each rudder. Passenger ships may be fitted with separate main and auxiliary steering gears, but will normally be fitted with 2 or occasionally more identical hydraulic power units. The power units must be able to meet the requirement to move the rudder from 35 degrees on either side to 30 degrees on the other side in not more than 28 seconds while one power unit is out of service. In other ships, this requirement can be met with all power units running. In passenger ships greater than 70,000 tons, the main steering gear must have 2 or more identical power units. The main steering gear must have 2 or more identical power units. With the exception of passenger ships, these can be run together to move the rudder from 35 degrees on either side to 30 degrees on the other side in not more than 28 seconds. Because of the increased safety and pollution risks associated with these ships, their hydraulic steering gears must have oil leak detection. In the event of loss of steering capability due to a single failure in any part of one of the power actuating systems of the main steering gear, excluding the tiller, quadrant or components serving the same purpose, steering capability must be regained in not more than 45 seconds after the loss of one power actuating system. In practice, this will mean that the hydraulic systems must be permanently separate, or, as is more common, a single system will automatically split itself into two independent halves in an effort to isolate the leak before all hydraulic oil is lost. Many steering control systems are now all electrical, but where the control system consists of a hydraulic telemotor, a second independent system must be fitted on these ships. Because of the proven reliability of some units, on tankers, chemical tankers and gas carriers below 100,000 deadweight tons, rudder actuators do not need to be duplicated, allowing two ram or single-vane rotary gears, provided they meet IMO guidelines on strength and reliability. For single rudder tankers, chemical tankers and gas carriers above 100,000 tons, SOLAS rules require full duplication of components up to the rudder stock, and for this reason steering gears with a minimum of 2 pairs of hydraulic chambers are required. Steering gear control must be available from the bridge and in the steering compartment. It must be possible to disconnect bridge control from the steering gear from within the steering gear compartment. In other words, if the bridge were put out of action in an emergency, then we should be able to take control of the steering gear from within the steering compartment. This is why the rules also require the rudder position to be indicated both on the bridge and in the steering compartment. Indication in the steering flat is usually taken direct from the rudder stock, so when testing gears, we should check that the rudder position indicated on the bridge is the true rudder position, as indicated in the steering flat. SOLAS rules require that in areas where navigation demands special caution, ships must have more than one steering gear power unit in operation when such units can be operated together.